It was 08:21 hours, July 2nd, 1967. Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines had been walking for less than 40 minutes when the machine guns opened up. There were approximately 400 Marines on the ground that morning. Facing them, already dug in, already waiting, were two full NVA battalions from the elite 90th Regiment, 324B Division. The elephant grass stood 7 feet high. The bamboo thickets swallowed sound and direction, and the NVA soldiers moving through those thickets were wearing American flak jackets and Marine helmets, shouting orders in English. By the time the sun went down on July 2nd, 84 Marines were dead. Nearly 200 were wounded. 9 were missing. It was the single worst day of losses the Marine Corps suffered in the entire Vietnam War. The newspapers the next morning covered it in 4 sentences. This is what those 4 sentences left out. In the summer of 1967, the strip of land just below the demilitarized zone was not a front line. It was a killing ground, and the NVA had been designing it that way for months. The Marines called the area the Trace, a 660-yard corridor of cleared land running between Con Thien and Gio Linh, 2 fire bases sitting less than 2 miles from North Vietnam. Con Thien itself sat on a small hill that gave observers a direct line of sight into the DMZ. That made it invaluable. It also made it a target that the NVA's 324B Division had been tasked to neutralize, not by a direct assault, but by bleeding the Marines in the terrain around it until the position became untenable. Operation Buffalo was the Marine response to that pressure. 2 companies, Alpha and Bravo, 19 Marines would push north along Route 561, establish forward positions above the Trace, and clear the area between the 2 fire bases. The mission made tactical sense on a map. On the ground, it required 2 understrength companies to move through terrain the NVA had spent weeks studying, mining, and fortifying. Terrain where 7-foot elephant grass made visual contact impossible beyond 10 meters. The NVA commander opposing them had not planned an ambush in the conventional sense. He had planned an encirclement. The 90th Regiment's 2 battalions were not positioned to stop the Marines. They were positioned to absorb the initial contact, hold the Marines in place, and then close from 3 sides simultaneously. What the Marines took for an enemy defensive line was actually the mouth of a trap. Captain Lester Carter commanded Bravo Company that morning. He was an experienced officer, not new to the DMZ, not new to contact. When his point element started taking machine gun fire near the road junction his men had labeled the marketplace, his first instinct was correct. This was more than a squad in a tree line. He called it in and began maneuvering. What he could not know yet was that his 3rd platoon had already been cut off. The NVA had let the platoon walk past them before opening fire, splitting Bravo Company into fragments. The Marines in 3rd Platoon were fighting in isolated pockets, 3 and 4 men at a time, in grass so thick they couldn't see the men 5 meters to their left. Then the AR-15 rifles started jamming. This detail never made it into the newspaper accounts, and it was not prominently featured in the official after-action reports. But the Marines who survived July 2nd came back to it repeatedly in the years that followed. In the heat and humidity of the DMZ, with dirt and carbon fouling the action after sustained fire, the AR-15, the weapon the Pentagon had issued as a replacement for the heavier M14, was failing at the worst possible moment. Men were clearing jams under direct fire. Some were using enemy weapons they pulled from the dead. The NVA soldiers opposite them, armed with AK-47s, were having no such problem. Captain Carter tried to push 2 squads forward to relieve the pressure on 3rd Platoon. NVA snipers in the tree line had been assigned a specific task: kill anyone carrying a radio and kill anyone making hand signals. Within minutes, Bravo's ability to coordinate internally had been effectively destroyed. The The squads Carter sent forward were cut down before they reached the tree line. At 09:05, Alpha Company, moving separately along the northern route, was hit from three sides. The NVA had waited until both companies were fully committed and mutually unable to support each other before triggering the second element of the ambush. Alpha's casualties in the first 30 minutes were catastrophic. The company command element was hit almost immediately. Officers and NCOs who tried to establish radio contact with battalion headquarters found the nets congested with overlapping transmissions from units that were all taking fire simultaneously. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Schenning, immediately committed his remaining forces and called for reinforcements. But the terrain that had swallowed Bravo Company's 3rd Platoon was now working against any relief effort. The NVA had positioned RPG teams along the most likely approach routes. The first relief column to push south along Route 561 took fire within 200 meters of departing the wire. What happened next is the part of Operation Buffalo that even the detailed historical accounts tend to compress into a single paragraph. For the better part of 6 hours, isolated groups of Marines, some as small as 4 or 5 men, held their positions in the elephant grass against NVA forces that were actively maneuvering to finish them. They were not holding defensive lines. There were no defensive lines. They were holding small circles of ground, back to back, waiting for a relief force that could not get to them. The NVA tactic that most confounded the survivors, and that generated the most discussion in Marine after-action analysis afterward, was the use of Marine uniforms and English-language commands. NVA soldiers wearing captured flak jackets and helmets moved through the confusion shouting, "Cease fire! We are Marines and don't shoot, friendly coming in." In the chaos of a broken ambush, in grass where you couldn't see the man next to you, that tactic worked. Marines held fire for fractions of seconds, and those fractions of seconds cost lives. One survivor later described it as the moment he stopped trusting his ears entirely and started trusting only what he could see with his own hands. He didn't write that in a letter home. He said it 30 years later at a memorial in Washington. By 14:00, 2 additional Marine battalions had been committed to the area. Helicopter gunships were finally able to work the NVA positions once forward air controllers established targeting coordinates. Marine artillery at Con Thien and Geo Lin began firing suppression missions along the ridgelines north of the trace. The NVA, having achieved the encirclement and inflicted the casualties they had planned for, began a phased withdrawal north, back across the DMZ, where American ground forces were prohibited from following. The extraction of the dead and wounded took most of the night. Medevac crews flew into LZs that were still receiving sporadic fire. Some of the bodies in the elephant grass weren't found until the following morning. The NVA 90th Regiment's after-operation assessment, partially reconstructed from captured documents and post-war Vietnamese military histories, described July 2nd as a successful demonstration of what North Vietnamese planners called hugging tactics, closing so tightly with American units that U.S. air power and artillery became unusable without risking friendly casualties. The assessment noted specifically that the AR-15 malfunction problem had been anticipated. NVA intelligence had gathered enough information about the weapon's reliability issues in humid jungle conditions to incorporate it into their timing, pressing the assault hardest during sustained firefights, when the American weapons would begin to fail. That is not something that appears in any American newspaper account from July 1967. It is not something that appears in the official Marine Corps press release. It was mentioned in a single classified technical evaluation report, filed by an ordnance officer who had spoken to survivors, and it did not reach public attention for years. The Marines of 19 did not need the documents to confirm it. They already knew. Operation Buffalo continued for another week after July 2nd, with 4 Marine battalions eventually committed to the area around Con Thien. The NVA's 90th Regiment had withdrawn but not disappeared. They remained in the DMZ, available to re-infiltrate, and the pattern of attritional combat around Con Thien continued through the fall of 1967. The September-October shelling of Con Thien, over 1,000 rounds of artillery and rockets in a single day at its peak, was a direct continuation of the same operational logic that had designed the July 2nd ambush. What changed after Operation Buffalo was less visible. The Marine Corps quietly accelerated the transition from AR-15s to the revised M16A1 configuration, with a chrome-lined chamber and a new cleaning kit issued with every weapon. The change was presented in technical documentation as a product improvement. The men who had cleared jams in the elephant grass on July 2nd understood what it actually was. Captain Carter survived the battle. He was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions on July 2nd. The citation described his leadership under fire, his attempts to maneuver his company against a significantly larger force, and his efforts to recover his wounded. It did not describe the 6 hours he spent in that grass knowing that the men he had sent forward were not coming back, and that there was nothing in the manual that told you what to do next. The 1st Battalion, 9th Marines carried a nickname before July 2nd, 1967. After that day, the nickname changed. Marines who came through Con Thien in the months that followed called them the Walking Dead. It was not meant as an insult. It was recognition, the kind that doesn't come with a ribbon or a ceremony, but that every man in the division understood immediately. If you had a father, an uncle, or a friend who served with 19 Marines near the DMZ in 1967, drop a comment below. These men carried July 2nd for the rest of their lives. Most of them never talked about it. Some of them are still alive. Their story deserves more than 4 sentences in a newspaper that moved on the next morning. The NVA 324B Division's operational planners had calculated that the terrain, the timing, and the weapons disparity would produce a result that would force the Marine Corps to reconsider the viability of forward operations near the DMZ. They were partially right. What they had not calculated, what their after-action reports never adequately explained, was why, after 6 hours in that grass, with their weapons jamming and their officers dead and no relief in sight, the Marines who were still alive were still holding. History gave them a nickname. They had earned something that doesn't have a name.